Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer in that order. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to take a look at the history of the big four grading companies and sort of go back to when each of them started and changes they've made along the way and sort of how that's led them to where they are today. Change is mainly going to be focusing on like the change in the grading scales and the change in the slabs, but also touching on some other items as well. A big four we're calling PSA, Beckett, SGC, and CSG. Those are really the biggest four by far in terms of market share. There are, of course, other companies out there, TAG and GMA and HGA and others, but the big four really own, the vast majority of the market share, and so that's what we're going to focus on in this video here and see how their history and the changes they've made over time have led them to, present day and get some perspective there. Quick shout out to viewer Adam who sent me an email sort of with the idea for this video and did a bunch of research on it for me ahead of time, so appreciate that, Adam. All right, we'll start in 1991, which is the year the first of the four companies opened up, and that was PSA. They had just a standard 1 to 10 scale, but no half grades. They did have qualifiers. It took a little while for PSA to get going. They definitely were not killing it right out of the gate from a business perspective. At the beginning, only authorized dealers could submit to PSA, but they eventually opened that up after a few years. PSA was growing slowly but surely in the 1990s, but it was really around 1998 when things exploded. A couple things sort of emerged all at this time to create this. One is eBay was emerging as the go-to place to buy and sell baseball cards, even more so than local card stores or local card shows. eBay was just booming. However, it was unregulated at the time, and there were many different scams going on. And buying graded cards was one way to prevent a lot of the scams, such as switching cards or over-grading a card or trimming cards or not getting the exact card that you ordered. Also in 1998 was the Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa chase of the single-season home run record. And this was one of the biggest booms to the sport card hobby in recent years, if not ever at the time, as both of those players did eventually pass Roger Maris's 61 home runs. Everyone was on the search for Mark McGwire's 1985 Topps rookie and Sammy Sosa's 1990 Leaf rookie, as well as many other cards from both players. And this led to an increase in people getting cards graded with PSA. In 1998, PSA received over 1 million submissions, which is what their entire total was for the years of 1991 to 1997 combined. Also in 1998, a second company formed, and that was SGC. At the time, PSA's 1 to 10 scale was not considered industry standard, so SGC created their own scale, a 1 to 100 scale, which they used for the next 20 years. The terms they used, such as X-Mint and VG and Gem Mint, were all very similar to PSA. However, obviously, the numbers were very different. A year later, Beckett joins the grading game, and Beckett was a massive name in the sports card world for their price guides in the 80s and 90s, which were the absolute go-to way to find values for your cards. They adopted the PSA 1 to 10 scale with a couple of very notable changes. One is they included half grades, 4.5, 5.5, etc. And they also made a 9.5 a Gem Mint, reserving a 10 for what they called pristine. The other thing that differentiated Beckett was they included subgrades, 4 subcategories, which sort of helped you identify why your card graded what it did. The 4 subgrades being corners, edges, surface, and centering. Those are still the 4 subgrades used today. When Beckett first started, the subgrades were on the back of the label. By 2000, grading had really caught on, and a bunch of grading companies popped up around then. Over the next 20 plus years, many companies came and went with varying degrees of success, but only these 3 stood the long-term test of time. In 2001, Beckett makes 2 changes or additions to their product, adding BVG, which is only for vintage cards 1980 and prior, and making BGS strictly for modern, 1981 to present. They also add BCCG as an option, which is meant for low-cost, high-volume submissions with a very strange grading scale going from 5 to 10. The lowest a card can grade is a 5. Most people consider the grades on BCCG to be incredibly inaccurate and the scale very confusing. In the early 2000s, PSA and Beckett were the clear 1-2 in the grading world, with SGC being a distant third. In 2005, Beckett makes 2 more changes, deciding to drop subgrades altogether from their BVG label, and they still are not offered on their BVG label today. And on their BGS label, they decided to move the subgrades to the front of the label. That is something that is also still active today. In 2008, PSA makes the first major change to their scale, adding half grades in order to keep up with Beckett. Ironically, PSA very rarely gives out half grades, even today. While the other 3 grading companies give them out just as regularly as the whole number grades, PSA avoids half grades unless in rare cases. As an example, the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr., which has been graded about 100,000 times, has only gotten 750 half grades in total. That's less than 1% of the time has the card received a 0.5 at the end of the number grade. As we get into the teens, PSA and Beckett are still the clear-cut number 1 and 2 grading companies, with SGC being a distant third, and SGC really only having any sort of market share when it comes to vintage cards. Around 2014, not sure the exact year, Beckett shuts down BCCG, no longer offering that service, and yours truly had no problems with that decision whatsoever. By 2015, the 1 to 10 scale that PSA originally used and Beckett with the half grades has become industry standard, and essentially all grading companies and even non-grading companies refer to the scale, except for SGC, which is still using their 1 to 100 scale, and they realize at this point that they're going to need to convert in order to keep up with the changing hobby. So they add the 1 to 10 scale in addition to the 1 to 100 scale onto their labels as sort of a transition move. In 2016, with Beckett no longer offering BCCG, they decide to offer a service without subgrades on their BGS label, targeting low-cost, high-volume collectors. Subgrades are now optional and come with a higher price tag. In 2018, SGC drops the 1 to 100 scale altogether, converting exclusively to the standard 1 to 10 scale. They make a major change to the look of their slabs, changing the fonts, making the number grade a whole lot bigger, and changing the colors around. It's met with mixed results, but it's proven to be a good decision in the long run. In 2020, the hobby experiences what will be the start of the biggest sports card boom in history, and a bunch of new grading companies pop up, including CSG. CSG initially takes Beckett's approach to things, calling 9.5 gem mint and offering subgrades. Just a year later, they make a number of massive changes, including switching gem mint to a 10, which is now much more industry standard. They drop subgrades altogether, and they change the look of their slab, going from a green outline to a black one. In early 2023, Beckett actually proposes a very similar scale change as CSG, changing a 9.5 to Mint Plus and switching their Gem Mint to a 10. However, there is extreme backlash from the community as people are used to Gem Mint being 9.5 for Beckett for some 25 years now, and Beckett pulls the idea, stating they're going to look into it further. And that brings us to where we are today. A couple other notes about sort of changes over time. You know, both CSG and SGC made drastic changes in the looks to their slabs at one point. PSA and Beckett haven't really done that, although they have made minor tweaks here and there over the years. And it should be noted that over time, PSA has slowly but surely been weeding out qualifiers. There was never like a big announcement around this or anything like that, but today qualifiers are used very, very infrequently by PSA, whereas towards the beginning they were used quite often. Today, in mid-2023, PSA is the industry leader by far, receiving something like 70% of all sports card submissions for grading. SGC is number 2, Beckett 3, and CSG 4, although 2, 3, and 4 are all pretty close to each other, sort of fighting for a smaller piece of the pie. In terms of the scale, all 4 companies are very similar, with notable exceptions at the top, where PSA has the simplest scale by far, and that has not seemed to hurt them in the long run. Beckett having a 9.5 be Gem Mint seems to be a problem for them at this point, as it's really not industry standard anymore, but there does not seem to be a good way, or at least they haven't figured out a good way to address this. Another thing I kind of noticed while researching this video is PSA has made the least changes to their look and to their scale of any of the 4 companies. Both CSG and SGC have made major changes to the look of their slabs, and Beckett has made a number of moves in terms of the services they offer and things like that. PSA has really remained the most consistent in that arena for whatever that's worth. But that's it for the timeline of the big 4 grading companies and the changes to their grading scales and the looks of their slabs. Curious to hear people's perspective if you think this is, very significant as to why things are shaping up the way they are today, or if this is just sort of more interesting, historical notes more than like relevant to anything, or if it's not interesting at all. But appreciate everyone watching, and see you all again next time. Thanks, everyone.